Go
Okay.
for
In regards to jail expansion, I applaud our county commission for revisiting the jail expansion topic. This may be an unpopular opinion amongst my coworkers, but I'm opposed to expanding the jail at this time. I don't feel jail expansion benefits our community. Something I don't hear being talked about is that a nearly $30 million expansion would require roughly 60 new officers to staff it. Frankly, we are having a difficult time staffing the current jail. The last thing I want to see is a jail expansion that sits idly by with no staff to support it. I think our focus should be shifted to fully exploring alternatives to incarceration. This can be as simple as issuing citations and or completing charging affidavits in lieu of arresting subjects on the spot. I truly believe we are moving in the right direction with the construction of the mental health campus and the implementation of pretrial release, mental health court, drug court, and enhanced or expanded probation. We need to give those programs a chance to work and come up with sustainable long-term goals.
Thanks, Dale. Doug?
My position is I really don't have a position on the jail. We're as a sheriff's office, we're statutorily required to provide a jail for the county. And we need to provide a safe and secure environment for those folks that are in jail as well as that are working in the jail. We have to provide basic mental health and physical health needs for those inmates. And we also must provide services for those inmates that are being released so they can transition back into our community. The sheriff doesn't get to choose when somebody's arrested, who's arrested, what their bond is, how long that person's going to be in jail, how long that person's going to be sentenced, and when they get released. Those factors are decided by our legislators, our district attorney's office, the defense attorneys, and our judges. Prior to the pandemic issue, we were way over capacity, and we had inmates that were farmed out all across the state. These inmates were not able to take advantage of any of these programs we have in place. Reentry, Burt Nash, DECA, those types of things we have, the great programs we have going into jail. They weren't able to see their family and their friends. They weren't able to have regular meetings with their attorneys. Fundamentally, or the functionality capacity of the jail right now due to COVID is 164. The CJCC project is estimating that the jail population will spike, and that our basic numbers will be about 202 to 203 by September and October. So that's where our problem really lies, is we're dealing the cards that we're dealt. We're playing the cards we're dealt.
Thanks, Doug. Jay?
So I think that, I'm sorry, I don't have my stuff written down. I've just got talking points, so I'll try to work back through them here. The next sheriff is going to have to deal with whatever is handed to them. If the jail expansion passes through and the funding is signed off on by the county commission, the next sheriff is going to have to figure out how to staff the place. Again, that's not a decision that the sheriff will make. And I feel like the tide is turning, and I do feel like the jail expansion is being reconsidered and is probably not going to happen. We have to figure out some way to get to expand these programs. But again, like Doug said, we are the executive branch. The judicial branch is the one that sends these people to us. They're the ones that decide how long they stay. They decide what crimes they're there for. They set the bail, and bail reform is something that hasn't even hardly been addressed, in my opinion. And that's we're keeping people who are too poor to get out of jail. You and I are charged with the same crime, but we get the same bond, even though it has no say on where we come from or what kind of money we have. That bond may be 50% of my annual income, but if you're wealthy, that's only 1/3% of your annual income. That means nothing to you, but it's my life. So we need to really look into into how this stuff happens. The courts, as far as jail expansion as well, we really need the help from the courts, and that starts with the state. We need another division. We need another judge. State obviously is broke due to the spending of the last governor, and we're trying to bail ourselves out. So we're not going to get any money from the state.
Thanks. I think the last one we wanted to do a quick take two on was the CJCC report with regard to incarceration rates and the disparity between incarceration rates for African Americans versus for white inmates. Dale, do you want to start us off again?
Sure. In regards to the higher incarceration rates for Black individuals as compared to the white individuals, I feel this can be directly correlated to the social injustices and implicit biases we are dealing with. Equity and access are two key principles to social justice. When underserved individuals don't have the same means to bond out, excuse me, or be released from jail due to their circumstances, these individuals will remain in custody, which affects the incarceration numbers. In addressing the issue, I plan to implement the same training program that the Lawrence School District and LMH Health have utilized. It's called Beyond Diversity. I am committed to fostering an environment of equity and transparency at the Sheriff's Office.
All right, Jay, what were your thoughts on the CJCC report?
So when the numbers came in, obviously they were shocking and quite honestly embarrassing, but they also brought about the question of how do we parse these numbers out? The disparity is clear, but I would like to know more about how these numbers, how we got to these numbers. And I don't want to sound like an apologist or like I'm trying to fog the issue, but I would like to know were these contacts, is it an enforcement issue? Is it a judicial issue? Is it some other issue? I want to get down to the core roots of why these problems are occurring. And if we can figure out a way to fix that system or fix all the systems, whatever it is. If, when the are doing self-initiated activities and making arrests, that's one thing. But when they're dispatched to a call that they had no control over whatsoever, they have to respond and they make arrests. That's not necessarily something that is easy to figure out where and what category it fits into as far as police contacts and that kind of stuff. So I would really like to see a little bit more work done as far as where these numbers came from. Let's break them down a little bit farther. But also when it comes to the disparity in how many days the Native American population as well as the Black population, because they're spending more days than white inmates for the same charges. I'd love to know where that comes from, but again, we don't set how long somebody stays in our jail, and so we would love to figure that out and go to that agency and let them know that we need to figure this out together.
Thanks, Jay. Doug, what were your thoughts on the report, and how do we address that disparity?
Well, I think we have to get all the data in first, and it's still being collected. It's very incomplete. Currently, the Sheriff's Office, Lawrence Police Department, I believe Baldwin and Eudora are participating in it's the law enforcement contact study. So it goes back to when officers are stopping vehicles, who are they stopping? What's the person's age, race, gender, all those issues. They're having to catalog that information. They turn that in. We need a bigger sample of that information. It's about 6 months. It's about 6 months into the study that they've been doing this. Another problem we have trying to get this data and the numbers to figure out the differences. The law enforcement database that we use is Spillman. Jay and Dale we probably can all agree on that system. There's some issues with that system, but our system doesn't talk to the court system either. So you're drawing numbers from law enforcement officers, and then you're drawing numbers from the court system. So how do those numbers how do they come together? There's a lot more data that needs to be collected and then analyzed. And I agree with Jay. We have to look at really where the core of that information is coming from. How are we measuring those things? And I agree with them. I was pretty surprised about the numbers when I saw them reading that report.
Okay, thank you. Want to stay on this same kind of area and ask, right now, a lot of us are navigating our thoughts and concerns about racism and violence, protests, ideas about defunding police. From the lens of sheriff, what concerns you, and how will that influence you as the leader of the Douglas County Sheriff's Department? Jay, let's start with you this time.
Okay, thank you. So young Black men have been being killed by police for centuries, and only now are we in the place with a 24-hour news cycle as well as the social media platforms that can put news out immediately. Freddie Gray is killed in 1990. only the people in Baltimore hear about it unless there's some sort of civil unrest that makes it a national issue. So George Floyd has presented us with the perfect opportunity to pivot this entire system to make the changes that have been long overdue. So when I hear defunding the police, I don't disagree with the premise. I think the term is misleading, but I do not disagree because police have been asked to do too much. Every social problem becomes a police problem because the police cannot shut the lights off. Every other agency can. So what I say is, let's not call it defund the police. Let's call it refunding social programs. Let's put some money back into housing. Let's put some money back into mental health. Let's put some money back into these drug problems. Let's kill this failed war against drugs stuff because it has absolutely put us in the predicament we're in. And so today, and starting on March 25th, when George Floyd was murdered, we were granted an opportunity as law enforcement to make the changes that have to happen. So, and I feel like Douglas County and Lawrence is the perfect place in Kansas for those to happen, because on everything else, people follow our lead. They may not like us, but that we do the right things.
Thanks, Jay. Doug, what concerns do you have, and how would they lead or shape your approach as the sheriff?
Well, what concerns me most is the systemic racism that is going on. And how do we earn back public trust? As we said, there's 90% of the cops are doing the right things for the right reasons. It's that small percentage that are making our job extremely difficult through their illegal activities, and we have to change that as one of our issues. To say, I know that systemic racism exists in our world, and as a sheriff, I want to make sure that all the people that work at the sheriff's office are not using race, sex, color, religion, gender, or any of a basis for their citizen contacts. Stopping someone investigating because of those issues. We're going to increase our training to make sure that our officers are aware of what's going on. And right now we're only mandated by the state to have 2 hours of training a year. I want to increase that to a minimum of 8 every year of more than 8 hours a year of bias-based police training. And there's different options for that. But that's where I want to really work at it, is getting our officers and our deputies to understand what's going on and that we treat everybody with dignity and respect.
Thanks, Doug. Dale, what are your thoughts?
In regards to the current state of the community and the nation as a whole, my biggest concern is protecting both our citizens and law enforcement officers that serve them. It troubles me greatly that the actions of a few officers have led to the point the nation is at today. Transparency and accountability are two crucial components in trying to rebuild the public trust that has been stripped away. If elected sheriff, my undersheriff, Clark Riles, will spearhead a social justice committee that will facilitate an open dialogue between all parties. You can rest assured Black Lives Matter and Justice Matters will be offered a seat at that table. I believe continued and expanded training, specifically, like I mentioned before, beyond diversity training for the sheriff's office staff in social justice is a key component to having a healthy community. The last thing law enforcement officers want is to be at odds with our community. We need to facilitate open dialogue between all parties, including the LGBTQ community. Change will only occur when those involved are open to change. Clark and I are committed to leading this charge. As a person who deeply cares about humanity, I will not hesitate to act upon matters that are unjust, unlawful, and create a greater divide in the relationships that we are trying to build. Criminal actions are criminal actions, whether it involves a citizen or a law enforcement officer. Citizens and officers alike will be held accountable.
Thanks, Dale. Doug, do you think that there's a need to review and or change the lethal force policy that's used in Douglas County?
Well, policies always have to be reviewed, examined, and rewritten as times change. But the lethal force still remains the same premise, that a law enforcement officer must feel that his life or another life is in grave danger, or the result or bodily harm could result if they do not take action. One of the things I plan on doing is what will be called inoculation stress training, or stress inoculation training. And what that is around is you train officers under stressful situations, under controlled environment, to see how they will react to that. And I think that will push officers to understand what's going on in those stressful situations, which are typically, a lethal use of force situation is a stressful situation. So we need to work with our officers on those situations and train them properly on that.
Dale, what are your thoughts on the lethal force policy in Douglas County?
Well, we are governed by state statute. The use of force clearly states that an officer is justified in the use of force which the officer reasonably believes to be necessary to effect an arrest. Lethal or deadly force means the application of physical force which is likely to cause death or great bodily harm to a person. Policy further states, excuse me, officers shall stop the use of force when the subject ceases to resist or when the incident is under control. Also, an officer has a duty to intervene to prevent or stop the use of excessive force by another officer when it is safe and reasonable to do so. The officer shall verbally report the use of force to his supervisor, then follow it up with a written report of the incident. We at the Douglas County Sheriff's Office frequently review state statutes. I don't feel the lethal force policy needs to be changed. It is pretty straightforward at this point.
Thanks, Dale. Jay, what are your thoughts?
Well, I can tell you this. The Douglas County Sheriff's Office has an extensive use of force policy that's been reviewed and redone and updated, and it's like the Constitution. It is a living and breathing document that never stops being reviewed and looking for room for improvement. Just our use of force when it comes to controlling subjects, as well as the use of weapons and firearms, is 37 pages long. It's a substantial policy, but it's very clear in what we can and cannot do, should and should not do. What I'll also say is that when you become a law enforcement officer, you're required to get 40 hours of training a year to keep your certification. When a Navy SEAL goes off on a 6-month deployment, they have to train for 18 months to go on that deployment. We train for 40 hours a year to do this job for 30 some odd years. I just honestly feel like that the lack of training and the lack of scenario-based training and the training that Doug talked about, that's the kind of stuff we need to be doing, because we need to put these people in these scenarios, in these situations. So not only can we evaluate them, they can learn how to appropriately handle these situations, but also it lets them know what their limits are. Maybe we put somebody into a position where they have to make a split decision, and all of a sudden they realize this job is not for them. That's the kind of people that we want to split ways with amicably, because they know they can't do it and we know they're not the right fit for us.
Jay? So all three of you seem to agree that mental health programs are important to assist the public, inmates, and law enforcement with diagnosis and treatment and to decrease recidivism. What is working in Douglas County and what needs additional focus in the current comprehensive platform? Doug, let's start with you this time.
Okay, well, I think all the programs we have are working, but I think we can enhance those programs and improve those programs just as the world is changing. One of the big things I think we need to work on is our cognitive thinking training. And I'll explain that a little bit, where, if an individual is arrested, what lifestyle is that person leading? And when they get out of jail, for however long that period may be, what lifestyle are they going to go back to? Are they going to keep hanging out with the same people that they were hanging out with before? If they're hanging out with the wrong crowd, is that crowd involved in drugs or other illegal activities? We got to get people to start thinking about basically the consequences of things. And when I get out and I'm back in society, I don't need to associate with that group of people and that kind of activity. So I think cognitive behavior is huge. Continuing with some of the other programs we have at the jail, we're helping people get driver's licenses, social security cards, and things like that. We're working with their job interview skills, resume building skills, those things. We're partnering with the Lawrence College and Career Center and with DECA and Burt Nash and other community service providers. We're enabling people to obtain their GED while they're being confined to the jail. I think all of these things are working. We just have to keep going at it. If we need to tweak them here and there, then that's what we do. but I think we're doing the right things for the right reasons, and we just have to keep going forward and getting people to do it.
Thanks, Doug. Jay, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think obviously the correctional setting, we deal with a lot of mental health issues. And as much as I want to talk about my platform with first responders mental health, this is something that the community wants to hear about more than that. And that is, we do have all these programs set up with the reentry, but I don't want to pass judgment on the environment that somebody came out of. And until we're in a place where we can actually have these programs, these housing, this cognitive therapy, which it takes about 100 hours for somebody to change their mindset, 100 hours of cognitive therapy training for them to actually change their mindset. But until we have housing ready, jobs ready for them on the outside, we're really, if we, like Doug said, if we send them right back out in the same environment that they came from, we can't expect a different result. So that's why this is an all-encompassing. Mental health is a very, very big deal, but it's also tied in and under the same umbrella as the other things, as far as like housing and social justice and all in the social issues. Drugs are obviously a very big portion of this. So but as far as mental health for first responders, which is obviously where my heart's at, is that I think that Sheriff McGovern has created the environment for law enforcement to say, I don't feel okay. I don't think I can do this today. And we don't want to send mentally unhealthy people out onto the streets, and then you don't want them responding to your home. So we're changing the environment, but also I want to keep that going. I want to have the support, the peer support. We already have Paul Taylor on board as our employee assistance person, but also I would expand that to have a clinician on staff, whether it be through contract or actually through the sheriff's office, somebody who can do regular checkups, somebody who can be available if needed. And then when you have a large scale incident or like they had it with Lawrence Police Department with an officer involved shooting here last week, you can have those mental health services right there at your fingertips. Thank you.
Okay, Dale?
I think the Douglas County Sheriff's Office has been very fortunate, to work and collaborate with Burt Nash, DECA, and our own reentry team. Developing programs that assist individuals suffering from behavioral or mental health conditions. Mental health court and drug court have also made a positive impact. One area I think needs to be addressed when appropriate is looking for alternative avenues to take in order to divert individuals suffering from mental health crisis away from incarceration. Further, I support continued crisis intervention team officer training. I look to establish a sheriff's officer co-responder team that pairs a crisis intervention team trained officer with a mental health clinician. This team will respond to mental health emergencies beyond the city of Lawrence, expanding access to those that live in the county, which we are not served. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to Jay this time. Do you have any plans or ideas about how to address corruption within the Sheriff's Department or corrupt officers? Or are there any kind of policy changes that might be in order?
I actually, when I read the word corruption, it actually really took, it hurt to even hear that in the sentence. And I think you're going to hear from the other two that I feel like our agency is exemplary. We have had bad apples, and the bad apple, that whole one bad apple ruins a bunch is out the window. We can't use that anymore because we're not in a profession where we're allowed to have any bad apples. It's like Chris Rock says, you can't have a few bad apples in the airline pilot business because most of them land their planes, but a few of them drive them into the side of a mountain. Well, you can't do that. Same with police. We have way too many. We have the ability to take people's rights away from them, not just to move freely about the country, but we can take people's lives, we can take people's livelihoods, we can take people's families from them. And I take that very, very seriously. And I know the other two candidates do as well. So if there's any hint of corruption or any hint of especially criminal activity, number one, it needs to be investigated by an outside agency immediately and then dealt with in the most swift and transparent manner that we can by law, because obviously with personnel issues, it's going to get very, very difficult in the transparency front. But I can tell you this, that if your community trusts you as a leader, they're going to trust you when you say, I am on this, and on when I can, I will tell you what I know, and I will give you a certain number of days. And if I don't make good on that promise, I expect to be held accountable for it. Okay.
Thanks, Jay. Gail, what are your thoughts on this?
Like Jay said, I'm not aware of any corruption with the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. If that were the case, I'm pretty confident the current administration would handle that accordingly. If elected sheriff, any future corruption, misconduct, racial profiling, etc., would be handled in accordance with local, state, and federal laws. One of the main priorities of my campaign is transparency. I believe the community has a right to know when substantiated claims have been made against law enforcement officers. I fully support the National Police Misconduct Database. Furthermore, I think it should be noted that anyone witnessing misconduct of any Douglas County Sheriff's Office employee can report that to our Internal Affairs Division. They can even go to the website, www.djso.org, for further information. You can also go to the Kansas Attorney General's website at ag.ks.gov to file a complaint for racial or bias-based policing. I think those are things that need to be known by the community so we can help police ourselves better.
Thanks, Dale. Doug, what are your thoughts?
Well, a couple of things that I would change or do differently is when I'm elected sheriff, I plan on bringing in a person in from the outside who has no affiliation or connection with Douglas County, doesn't even live in this community, to be our professional standards investigator, to look at these cases with a different view. I mean, currently, we have officers who currently work for the sheriff's office that are assigned to professional standards unit. That person is required to investigate fellow employees. That can sometimes create a little bit of an awkward situation. So I bring somebody in from the outside who will do these investigations. We have any complaint of misconduct, well, that's an internal complaint from one of our other officers saying, hey, I think this guy was out of line, or this person was out of line during this, or if it's a public complaint, we're going to aggressively investigate those complaints. And if that complaint is found to be true or founded, we'll take appropriate action. If it's egregious enough that we need to terminate that employee, that's exactly what we're going to do. And we're going to report that employee to CPOST, which is the Kansas Standards on Law Enforcement. They control our commission, and our commission allows us to arrest people and things like that. Their name will go into that database, and it's up to CPOST whether or not that person's allowed to continue being a law enforcement officer in the state of Kansas, within directly ties to the national database, or will tie to a national database, to prevent these officers from going to other agencies and working. But one of the other policies I want to commit or implement is officers are going to be required to report these incidents if they see them, and if they don't receive them, then they'll be dealt with discipline-wise too.
All right, thanks, Doug. Sticking with that same sort of general topic, the City of Lawrence Police Department has had a Citizens Review Board in place for about 2 years, but they haven't reviewed any cases since its inception. Are you open to establishing a Douglas County Citizens Review Board? And if so, what kind of steps would you take towards the creation of that committee? Dale, let's start with you.
I would absolutely be in favor of establishing a Citizens Review Board. With transparency, again, being one of my top priorities, public insight and perspective is crucial to building the public trust. There would need to be representation on the board from a cross-section of the community. I would ask that applications be made to serve on the board, and I would want some form of vetting process to determine that a potential member could be committed to serving for a period of time. So yes, I'm very much for a CRB, or Citizens Review Board.
Doug, what are your thoughts?
And I too am open to that concept. I'm sure the other candidates will agree. We have to get the right people on there, and a vetting process or an application process is important. But once those people are selected, we have to train those people also. And one of the things that we can do is sending members of a Citizens Review Board to a school or a training session that's called For Science. I've been to the 3-day school. There is a 5-day school that is basically a pass or fail thing kind of school. But it teaches you the amazing things that this school can teach you. And it doesn't matter if you're a law enforcement officer or if you're a citizen who's never been involved in those types of situations. But definitely open to that idea. Application process, vetting process, and then training the members of the community to be part of that citizen review board is paramount, I believe.
Thanks. Jay?
Yeah, from the beginning, I've actually had, that's been part of my platform, is that I would create a citizens review board. We don't have a union, a police union like the city, so their citizens review board has to operate a little bit differently. I would actually expand it to actually be able to be used for low-level use of force situations, citizen complaints, obviously, but also for periodic or for just periodic compliance checks, to where we just bring in a certain number of situations or incidents to them for them to look at, because I don't want them to sit stagnant. But as far as the board itself, I'm in a total agreement that the people would need to be vetted. And if I was to be asked to be on a plumber's review board, I would need to go and learn how to do the thing, or what a plumber does. Well, I would want these people to come into the Douglas County Citizens Academy, which has been going for 5 or 6 years now, and it is stellar. We let people come in, we let them drive our cars, we let them use all of our equipment, everything. We immerse them in our system and let them look at it from the inside. And we don't pull any punches. Everything is transparent. We don't hide anything. I want the people to know what it is, but I also want them to bring their unique community-based perspectives in, so that they can look at things from all angles. If they decide, and I feel like they should actually have a say on how some of these low-level cases are handled. Obviously, as sheriff, you would have the ultimate say, but I want to hear what they have to say and take their recommendations.
Okay, thanks, Jay. At this point, we had saved a little bit of time for questions from attendees, but because of the technical difficulties, we don't have anybody live with us. I think, Rob, you have a couple of questions that have come in from the community. Do you want to ask one of those?
I do have 2 questions, and I'm going to also preface that with the technical difficulties that we've had leave me worried that our first few questions, the first 3 questions, were interrupted with the recording, with the connectivity that we had in and out. If there is not time, we understand, but if there is time, and obviously it's got to be unison agreement here, that if there's time, maybe we could approach those 3 first questions again. The questions that I have from the community are good. And for example, question number 1, would you support designating an officer to be an LGBTQ liaison and or other marginalized groups or populations of the community? And what would that look like?
Dale, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Obviously, it'd have to be someone that would want to choose that role. I think that would be a great approach, because that's one of the underserved parts of our community, that they don't feel like their voices are being heard. I would totally support that.
Jay, what do you think?
Well, this question's a little bit in my wheelhouse here. My Undersheriff Stacy Simmons and her wife are not only 2 of the best humans I know, they are the godmothers to my daughters. 10 years ago when they got married, I actually got online and got ordained so I could do the ceremony myself. I have been immersed in LGBTQIA2+, the issues for as long as I can. I've been to seminars on how to interact and help the trans community, and especially the kids that are in the trans community that are trying to work their ways through school, on how best to help them figure things out. So not would I want somebody on the seat to be part of it, and obviously Under Sheriff elect Simmons would wholeheartedly accept that role. I know that we have members of our agency who are members of that community, and luckily we've created an environment where they can be who they want to be and who they actually are. However, we would make this this would be a very big deal, because it's a big deal to me and it's a big deal to our community. Thank you.
Thanks. Doug?
I agree with both the other candidates, Day and Joe. First, you have to find the person with the right passion that wants to do that. And you open that up for folks who are interested in that, who want to be part of that, and want to make that situation better. And I think that's where you have to start at. But yeah, definitely I would be in support of a liaison for any marginalized group within Douglas County or with our community that we live in.
There is a very similar question. Maybe we could broaden it a little bit, but this question is similar in nature. But for community outreach and public engagement initiatives, what types of outreach programs and/or initiatives would you support to help to build trust and relationships between law enforcement and the community members? And then they specifically go on to talk about inclusiveness and marginalized groups. So there's a little bit of an overlap here with the prior question, but let's broaden it a little bit and just talk about other outreach initiatives that you might think would be advisable to help build that trust.
Jay, do you want to start with that one?
I do, thank you. So community outreach is something that we should have been doing, and we have done some. But for me, the most marginalized among us, obviously the people of color, the LGBTQ, as we talked about, trans community. But I want to see more. I want to see more officers and more interaction in the schools. So that way, the first interaction that these young kids have with a police officer is a positive one, not one where we're being called to something that they had no control over and some result that they have that they don't understand is going to happen. I want them to be able to know us, who we are and what we're about prior to us showing up at their house at on probably the worst day of their family's life. So we've got plans in the works for some kids camps. I would love to see way more engagement in the schools itself. But also, the Lawrence School District has started in on the restorative justice programs. And we always hear about the school to jail pipeline. And obviously, the jail is a very big deal to us, and we want to sever that pipeline if we can. So if there's some system that is working in the schools for the restorative justice, let's broaden that. Let's move it up into the adult world and see if we can't make this whole thing work. So I feel like the schools, it's really, I mean, these kids are our future. And so if we don't engage with them now, they're just going to they're going to learn what they want to learn instead of what we are actually about.
Doug, what kind of outreach would you do as sheriff?
Well, I think one of the things I would do is continue doing what I've already been doing. I've served on community boards. Myself and Rob Holtz, we were on the Ballard Community Center board for several years together. I was on that board for 5 years. I learned about nonprofits, but what I wanted is the members of the sheriff's office to serve on different boards in the community and different committees in the community, so we can be out there and understand what's going on at another level with our community. I learned a lot about nonprofits by serving on the Ballard Community Center board. Agree with Jay. We need to be more involved in the schools. I've done the Big Brothers and Big Sisters Bigs in Schools program. That was another eye-opening experience where we partnered with Kennedy Elementary School and went in and mentored kids who were, for lack of a better term, were their highest at-risk kids. To me, these are the types of things we need to be doing as law enforcement. The old adage of we protect and serve. Well, we can serve our community in so many ways, and being involved in our community, I think, is vital. And it's from the top to the bottom. Allowing people while they're working to serve on boards or committees is vital to community trust and those types of issues.
Thanks, Doug. Dale, what are your thoughts about outreach?
I would agree with both gentlemen. I think it starts, like Jay said, at an early age. It's that first interaction with children. If it can be a positive interaction, we're well on our way of broadening or changing that barrier that seems like it exists for people of color and law enforcement. If we can fix that at an early age, or at least give them something positive to hold on to for the rest of their life, I think we're well on our way of bridging that gap. I know Clark Riles, he's been doing that for a number of years in the school district. So I would kind of refer to him on that, because that's something that he's been doing for a period of time. And I know he's gotten lots of positive results from it.
Okay, thanks. Rob, was that all the questions we had from the community?
That is, again, all the questions that we have. Unfortunately, because of the difficulty that we had with technology. So I'm so sorry, and I apologize. I apologize to you, the candidates, but also to the community.
All right. Thank you, guys. Those are all the questions that we had. So now we'll give all of you a chance to make a brief closing statement, and we will go back to our order from when we drew straws earlier. So Jay, if you would like to give us your statement.
Okay. So this upcoming election, and let's be clear here, right now is a very difficult time for everybody, but it's also a very trying time to be running for the office of sheriff, which you want to be the top law enforcement officer in our community. But this election is going to happen on August 4th. The Democratic primary is going to decide the next sheriff of this county. So it affords us the opportunity to actually make the change that we've been wanting and has been needed for so long. It's time for, I'm only 44. I'm not going to be a one term and done sheriff. I've got years to offer this community. I'm ready to move away from the good old boys system that we've been under for decades. I want to be held just as accountable as my officers, because I put my life in their hands at any second because I know they're training in their heart, but I expect them to be able to put their life in my hands as well. So it's my home, it's where I'll always be, and it's where my heart's at. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Doug?
As I can tell everybody, I've worked my entire adult life at the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, and I have a vested interest in the Sheriff's Office in Douglas County. I've lived here my entire life. I want to make Douglas County better, and there are things we need to do differently and we need to do better as a sheriff's office. I think that I'm the guy to make those changes happen. But throughout the years, we've all worked here, all the candidates have worked here, 20 plus years. And I think everybody has a vision and a mission. And I think our visions are very similar. But I think you have to look at, are you involved in the community? Are you involved in the agency and doing things like that? All of these things go into making you a good sheriff. We have to earn back the community's trust and the public trust. These are all the things that I want to work on doing as the sheriff.
Thanks, Doug. Dale?
In closing, I want the community to know that while my name will only be my name on the ballot for the upcoming election, Clark Riles will be there with me as well. Clark already knows this, but the community should as well. My campaign for sheriff of Douglas County is a team approach with Clark, and it's not going to be a dictatorship. This should be evident by the fact that Clark is the only undersheriff candidate listed on any campaign signs. Clark and I firmly believe Douglas County needs a person of color in a top law enforcement leadership role. I can think of no better person than Clark Riles to serve as undersheriff. I was going to talk about my website, but I'm not going to do that. Thank you again to the Lawrence Board of Realtors for hosting this event, and thank you to the community for engaging in conversation. A vote for Clark and I is a vote for change. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dale. And thank you, Jay and Doug, as well. We really appreciate all three of your time today. I know, just speaking for myself, I've learned a lot about this race and where you all stand on the issues. So this has been very informative, and I know that it'll be well received by the community.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just say, again, Lieutenant Armbruster, Deputy Flory, and Captain Woods, thank you. I apologize for the technical difficulties. You have been more than kind, and so thank you for the extra effort today. We will record this. Well, I mean, it's been recorded. We will publish this, and we'll get it out so that you and your offices can share it. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.